Ukraine, where the country's president, Viktor Yanukovych, has invited a leader of the opposition to become prime minister in a bid to quell anti-government unrest. Let's get more now on this surprise turnaround from RT's Peter Oliver, who is there in Kiev. So this appears to be momentous news coming there from the Ukrainian capital. Tell us more, Peter.
Well, the latest round of talks between the government and the opposition appears to have resulted in something of a breakthrough. We've been hearing from Viktor Yanukovych, the president of Ukraine, saying that he will make changes to the constitution of the country that will see Ukraine revert back to a parliamentary presidential republic. Now, what that means is that the parliament will have more powers following this decision. Also, the news that the leader of the opposition group Fatherland, Arseny Yatsenyuk, will be offered the job, or has been offered the job, of Prime Minister. We're also hearing that Vitaly Klitschko, the other opposition leader, and of course the former world heavyweight boxing champion, could be given the role of Deputy Prime Minister there as well. All of this coming out of these most recent talks between the two sides. Now, the President also said that the opposition and the government, the police and the opposition, had agreed to clear the streets of Kiev. Now, that will be a rather long process. We've seen a lot of encampments, a lot of defences, barricades and the likes being built up, and there's still an awful lot of people out on the streets here. In fact, about 200 metres over to my left, there's still ongoing clashes between riot police and rioters, fires still burning, and I can actually hear just over to my left loud shouts coming from just over in that direction. So that's not going to be any kind of quick process of clearing the streets here. Now, we've also heard from President Yanukovych saying that he would grant an amnesty would be granted to all of those who've been detained by police, but that amnesty was dependent on rioters leaving government buildings that they have occupied here in Kiev. Those rioters have occupied buildings here in Kiev as well as across the country.
And what about the reports of those two police officers who were taken hostage by rioters? They've been released. Do you know more about that?
Yes, well, these two police officers, they were part of a group of three that were attacked not too far away from where I am right now. On Friday evening, they were then taken captive by their attackers, and one of those police officers was released on Friday evening. He was rushed straight to hospital with stab wound injuries. The other two officers have now been released on Saturday, and they've also been taken to hospital, talking about being tortured by their captors and beaten as well. So they've now been released. They're in hospital right now receiving treatment. And we heard from the authorities here that any acts of or any threats of violence by rioters would be responded with force from riot police.
Of course, it's been a turbulent week, hasn't it? And you've been there throughout these events, Peter. Just recap what has happened there for the country.
Well, we've seen running battles and standoffs with police here in Kiev, and that eventually spreading into the west of the country and into some cities in central Ukraine as well. Now, here in Kiev, from what we were able to see on Tuesday, the barricades and where the main flashpoint is, which is just over, as I say, over to my left, around 200 meters away near the Dynamo Stadium. The original barricades that were being used there were burnt-out police vehicles that had been taken as riot police were, severely outnumbered by the amount of rioters on the streets, armed with rudimentary weapons, Molotov cocktails, rocks that have been, being mined from the paving slabs of the city of Kiev and hurled towards riot police. Riot police had responded with rubber bullets, tear gas, flashbang grenades. On Wednesday, we saw police attempt to clear out that whole area with a large charge from them, but that really only succeeded in clearing out that area for, less than half an hour before those riders came back, and they built far more sturdy barricades. When I was walking around there today, we're seeing really a production facility going on, where in the rear echelons of the barricades, Molotov cocktails are being made. We're seeing those rocks that are being dug up from the street here. They're being put into sacks and sent up to the front line so they can be used against police there. Now, on Thursday, it did seem like we were going to start to see some kind of breakthrough. A truce was called as talks began between the opposition and the government. However, that truce, well, it lasted it lasted for Thursday, but on Friday, the fires were relit. Now, these fires are a huge tyre fire that is separating the front line between the police and rioters. Big, thick, acrid smoke there, making it very difficult to see. That's still burning right now. And on Saturday, we've seen, well, again, more building of barricades, reinforcing of barricades, and this whole process continuing of clashes and standoffs between rioters and riot police. So this news coming out from the latest talks between the opposition and the government, seemingly providing some kind of breakthrough, and them talking about trying to clear the streets of Kiev. Both sides apparently agreeing to that. It will be a long process, but it does seem as if some things are moving forward here in Ukraine.
Right, Peter, thanks very much indeed for that. RT's Peter Oliver live there in Kiev. Let's now talk more on what is happening there in the country. We'll cross live to international relations expert Mikhail Molchanov from St.Thomas University in Canada. Some huge concessions there from Ukraine's leadership. Do you think this really could be the end of the unrest and the violence there now?
I do not expect that violence will stop immediately. Indeed, these are significant concessions, but from the point of view of protesters, this is too little too late. In fact, they demand resignation of the president and they demand sweeping changes in the constitution and in the cabinet. I do not think that President Yanukovych will agree to that, and a good and encouraging sign is that he indeed talks to the opposition leaders and he indeed makes some decisions to placate the protesters. What he is not doing, in my view, is talking to the people of Ukraine direct, and in fact, the big question is whether or not the opposition leaders represent everyone who is protesting on the streets now.
Well, yes, you make a good point. The government and the opposition leaders have said, yes, they will clear the streets. But do you think that means that all of the protesters will listen, bearing in mind, of course, the nationalists, the extremists amongst the opposition there?
Absolutely. Therefore, I'm quite skeptical that these riots will be dealt with effectively in the near future. They will continue for some time. Indeed, as you mentioned, there are nationalists there, there are neo-Nazi there, and there are representative of the so-called right sector group, which combines hooligans and neo-Nazi and rightists from all sides, East and West, and all sides of political spectrum. Therefore, I do not think that everyone will follow the call of opposition leaders for a peaceful resolution of this conflict. Some of these youth are hell-bent on violence, and they will continue for some time.
And Mikhail, the opposition leaders, they've been offered these top jobs. Presumably they will take them. And in doing so, will that not weaken Yanukovych even more? After all, the presidential powers will be lessened as a result of this agreement.
This is true, but I don't see how else he can save the face and indeed his presidency. As you mentioned, the situation in Ukraine is dire, and in fact there are various acts of civil disobedience going through the west of the country and the center of the country, and something has to be done which is pretty drastic. I believe the president made a number of mistakes. He could have saved the face earlier with appropriate actions. He didn't do that. He was perceived as arrogant by the people, and therefore he needs to make these big concessions now.
Well, the EU and the US, they condemned Ukraine's government earlier for pushing the country into this turmoil. Have they in effect got what they want now, but at a cost?
Well, I hope that neither American nor European politicians would really want to see Ukraine in chaos. But what I cannot I cannot fail to observe is that the European Union and the US, from the very early stages of the protest movement, unequivocally sided with the protesters, unequivocally supported the Maidan, and in this case, it is fair to say, interfered in the internal affairs of Ukraine as a sovereign state. Later on, when President resorted to violence, or his Minister of Internal Affairs resorted to violence, The chorus coming from the West, which was again unequivocal in condemning that, was justified by all means. But on the earlier phases, when still there was a peaceful process going on, I think the European Union was quite fast in showing its sympathies to one side of the Ukrainian society without showing full understanding of another side.
Mikhail, thank you so much for that. Really interesting to talk to you. Mikhail Molchanov, international relations expert, live here on RT International. We appreciate your time.